From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
What did the public learn from the testimony of Hunter Biden? And where is the Republican impeachment inquiry into President Biden going next? Plus, what to keep an eye on this Super Tuesday as voters in more than a dozen states head to the polls. Welcome, I'm Kyle Peterson with the Wall Street Journal. We are joined today by my colleagues, columnists Kim Strassel and Bill McGurn. For hours last Wednesday, Hunter Biden answered questions from investigators at the House of Representatives in a deposition that was turned into a 229-page transcript and then released. And now that we've had some time to read and digest it, let's talk about what we've learned here. But to start, let's have a clip of Jim Jordan, congressman from Ohio, on Fox News on Friday, describing what he sees as some contradictions in Hunter Biden's testimony.
The number of times he said something that was directly contradicted by other witnesses that we've already deposed and evidence we've already taken in was a big number. In fact, maybe the biggest one was this call that Devon Archer testified last summer when they were in Dubai with a board meeting with the folks on this Ukrainian energy company. The CEO of the company asked Hunter Biden, Devon Archer, can you help relieve the pressure we are under? Devon Archer testified that Hunter Biden then called D.C. and called his dad. Hunter Biden said, no, I didn't call D.C. I didn't call my dad. No way did I do that. So we got those kind of contradictory things. I think that was sort of the big takeaway.
Kim, what's your read of this transcript and how much the testimony of Hunter Biden has added to the evidence that Republicans have been able to accumulate?
Look, I think to really understand the importance of Hunter Biden's testimony, it's worth just for 2 seconds remembering how far we have come along here. You go back to the fall of 2020, the New York Post says it has this laptop, publishes stories about Hunter's business dealings. Candidate Joe Biden says, no, I've never had anything to do with my son's business. I don't talk to him about it. I'm walled off, and goes along with this fiction that got promulgated in the media and social media and these 51 intel officials that this is somehow disinformation. We now know that laptop's not disinformation. And what was most striking to me about Hunter's testimony was how much of, in fact, some of the worst aspects of what was contained on that laptop he admitted to during this hearing. So, for instance, we have this infamous email sent by a prior business partner to him, Jim Gilliar, to a number of people, including Hunter, talking about an equity arrangement in a deal with this Chinese energy company, CEFC. It envisioned 10% held by H for the big guy. Of course, the suggestion was always that the H was Hunter and that the big guy was Joe Biden. Hunter essentially admitted that, yes, Jim Gilliar was indeed proposing that, although Hunter said he shut it down. He admitted to various business meetings in Washington at Cafe Milano, in which he was entertaining business guests his father stopped by. He admitted that former business partner Tony Bobulinski was telling the truth when he said that he'd been introduced to Joe Biden out in Los Angeles in 2017 in the context of that CEFC deal. And it goes on, all of these different moments that suggest that there was some real interaction between Joe Biden and Hunter's business certainly do exist there. There are also the contradictions, and there are a number of them. You heard Jim Jordan talk about one. Another example is we had both Hunter Biden and Jim Biden do testimony in recent weeks. Hunter acknowledges Bobulinski's claim that he met with Joe Biden and Jim Biden in L.A. Jim Biden came in and said, no, Tony Bobulinski has never met Joe Biden ever. So even some of the people in this episode can't seem to keep their story straight. And you can bet that that's going to be a big focus of Republicans drilling down as we go forward.
Some of what Hunter said in his defense was he claimed that all of these interactions with his dad were just basic family interactions. He says this, "You understand my relationship with my family. When my dad was 29 years old, he woke up one day, went to work, and got a phone call and lost his wife and his daughter." And he went on to say, "In our family, When you have a phone call from I call him or he calls me or call one of his grandkids or one of my children, you always pick up the phone. It's something that we always do. And so, Bill, part of the question, I guess, is whether you believe that and whether or not, even if you do believe that, it's hard for me to not understand how Hunter Biden would not get the importance of if he's in this kind of business, this kind of influence business, and he gets that kind of a phone call with his dad, what it would mean to the people sitting across the boardroom table from him that he's answering a phone call from the vice president.
Yeah, Kyle, I think you're underestimating how often people suffering from a traumatic incident in their life then respond to that by inviting their father into all their business meetings with overseas oligarchs and so forth. Look, it doesn't pass the smell test. It's patently false. As someone who worked in the West Wing, let me tell you, every staffer knows that if you were sitting there and your child called on the phone and it was to impress his business partners, that his dad was in there, and, I would probably not say anything on the phone then, but I would then talk to my child and say, never do that again. Put me in that position. Joe Biden was a vice president. He ought to know better. And adding to the litany that Kim spelled out, we now know also that most of Joe Biden's explanations in the 2020 campaign, for example, he got these former intelligence officials, his campaign helped arrange for them to suggest the laptop was public disinformation and therefore discourage people from reporting on it. He categorically stated that his family hadn't seen one dime from China. Hunter admitted in court that he did collect money from China. So there's so many lies. And then if Joe Biden isn't the big guy, in the famous email saying 10% held by H for the big guy, who is? Why would people say that in a note? The truth is people don't want to hear what they found, and so they're poo-pooing it. Also, a lot of people are invested in the previous efforts to deny the credibility of these charges in 2020, to keep the Post story out of the news. And I think they don't want to be embarrassed.
But what's your read of this evidence then, Kim? I mean, this big guy email happened soon after Joe Biden left the vice presidency. So, I mean, are Republicans building an argument that Joe probably thought he was done with politics? He decided that he was not going to run in 2016. He ceded the way for Hillary Clinton, and I think was somewhat surprised that he had another opportunity then in 2020. And so is the takeaway here that maybe Joe Biden thought he was going to make some money now that he was out of public office for the first time in decades?
I think that's a very highly likely scenario based on the timeline we've been presented from this investigation. Now, to be clear, Joe did interact with Hunter Biden's businesses in times when he was in the vice presidency. And that in particular encompasses, for instance, some of these dinners in Washington, D.C., and some of these telephone calls that have been talked about. But there is no question that if you look at the timeline, there was what appears to be an acceleration of the intensity of that interaction in 2017, in particular in the spring, when he had just got out of office and when Hunter is on the brink of setting up this giant deal with CEFC. And that's when you have the meeting between Joe and Bob Alinsky, who's been brought in to help run this organization. He shows up, apparently, according to at least one witness in front of the committee. Joe Biden shows up at a lunch and was introduced to the head of CEFC in New York. You have this document coming through with 10 held for the big guy. So it seems very much, maybe at the beginning of that year, that Joe Biden was like, hey, decades of government service, poorly paid, and here's my opportunity to now use all my connections and make some money in the business world, which, by the way, is something lots of Washington figures do. Whether you think that's good or bad, it's not uncommon. So I think the error here, if that was what the case was, is his unwillingness, once he decided to get back into the presidential race, to not just be honest about that and say, look, I considered doing this for a while, and instead just take this incredibly hard line, which now is indefensible, that he never had anything to do with it. The other possibility is that he lent his name all along to this, and Hunter Biden abused it, dropped it in times when he shouldn't, put his dad on speakerphone when he obviously shouldn't, sent, we now know, There was a threatening text to a potential business partner saying, my dad's sitting next to me and you're going to be really sorry if you don't do this. Interestingly, in testimony, he says he doesn't remember writing that, but that if he had, it wasn't true and that he was just, quote, out of his mind on substance abuse at the time. So there is evidence to suggest that he was name dropping, using his dad as a threat when possibly his dad didn't know. But even then, Joe Biden had to know that something weird was going on when Hunter Biden was putting him on speakerphone. So even if Hunter was abusing the situation, Joe Biden was letting him.
Hang tight. We'll be right back with more on this in a moment. Welcome back. Kim was referencing this text message, and this is maybe one of the worst examples in the record that has been developed. Here is what Hunter Biden says in this text message. Have him call me tonight. I'm sitting here with my father, and we would like to understand why the commitment made has not been fulfilled. He goes on to say, if I get a call or text from anyone involved in this other than you, Zhang, or the chairman, I will make certain that between the man sitting next to me and every person he knows in my ability to forever hold a grudge that you will regret not following my direction, unquote. And in his testimony, as Kim described a moment ago, he says he doesn't remember this. He says, quote, I was out of my mind. He says his father was not actually sitting next to him. And he also claims that he sent this to the wrong person. So he says that the wrong contact in his phone received this text message, and it wasn't the person that was even involved in the business deal, which he says is the best indication of how out of my mind I was at this moment in time, unquote. And Bill, I suppose that looks a little bit better than Joe Biden than if he is sitting next to his son when this is taking place. But it does also suggest that's consistent with a story that Hunter Biden was using his name and using his father's position for his own purposes. And as Kim describes, I think there's a case that Joe Biden, to the extent that he knew that, had an obligation to try to stop it and to try to make clear, maybe in a public statement, that he is not in business with his son. He doesn't have any connection with this kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's what I said before. Anyone working in the White House knows you can't afford to have those kind of phone calls and be on them if you're working at the highest levels of government. Look, it's interesting how Hunter Biden's played out. From the beginning, he's played up his drug addiction and used it to say, I'm a victim, I don't remember anything. He certainly seems sharp enough to cash some of those checks, to get a diamond from one associate and a luxury car from another. I don't know if that worked for him. It doesn't prove Joe Biden knew. But you have to ask fundamentally, what were Hunter Biden and James Biden selling? They had no particular expertise. They had no knowledge of the countries they were dealing with. They were selling the Joe Biden name. It was a brand, as Tony Bobulinski testified. So it's very unseemly. I kind of feel, I don't know that this will extend to an impeachment. It certainly won't extend to a conviction, because the reverse of Donald Trump, there's not enough Democrats that will go along. So I think it will go nowhere. But it's important information for the public to have when they're voting in 2024, especially that Joe Biden misled them in debate after debate when the issue came up and mobilized some people to put out a statement suggesting it was all disinformation. The public should know that, and our system is better off when these things are decided by the people acting through the ballot box rather than impeachments and special counsels and so forth.
Kim, what's your read of where this inquiry is going? Obviously, we have a Democratic Senate, so the idea that Joe Biden, if impeached, would be convicted is not in reach for Republicans. Do they even have the votes in the House to get that impeachment over the line in the first place, particularly given that House majority? And what else is on the docket? I'm hearing now that they are planning to call Hunter Biden and try to have some public testimony with him.
Yeah, and by the way, I agree with Bill entirely that there's two questions here, whether or not they should do this and whether or not they can do this, because whether they have the votes. And I agree with Bill. I don't necessarily think they should go pull the trigger on impeachment. There's plenty that they can simply explain to the public that the public deserves to know as they go and make this very important decision about the presidency. But I think their bigger problem at the moment might simply be the mechanics of this, because they now have one of the most narrow majorities ever, especially after losing that New York seat that had been held by George Santos to Tom Suozzi. So now they're looking at really no margin whatsoever. And you certainly have some Republicans who have expressed reluctance to have an impeachment vote, those that sit in marginal districts where there is some support still for Joe Biden, but also those who I think have some concerns about the use of impeachment and the claims of high crimes and misdemeanors as a bit stretched when what you're looking at is simply stinky or ugly behavior. So they have a lot of convincing to do there. But because they haven't made that decision yet, instead, I think you're going to see some more public displays of all of this. In particular, remember, Hunter Biden wanted to do public testimony in the beginning. That was ludicrous. He wanted to make this into a show. That completely goes against the entire point of investigations, which always begin with these depositions, which are usually, by the way, conducted by lawyers for the committee. They're very set out in terms of their process and their procedure. They go for a very long time. Having gathered all of that introductory material, it looks as though both sides are in agreement that they will have some sort of public testimony. That should be a fireworks moment. And I think one big question for Republicans is, do they want to use it to try to score points? Or do they want to use it to actually try to drill into some of these unanswered questions, contradictions, failed memory that came out in this deposition, and further illuminate for the public how this whole Biden family business and brand worked?